I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own.
Good afternoon, my friends. How y'all doing today? My name's Carpo. I'm going to start a video here about, well, let's just say it's about human beings taking things too seriously. Human beings and our clubs, or our teams, and kind of the illusion that any team has anything really figured out. And originally this video was going to be about Catholicism but Catholicism and Freemasonry. And the more I got to thinking about this, the more I realized that those are just two of many clubs. And it was more important that I discuss the whole issue at hand. And first off, to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. Why do we take things so seriously? The things we believe. And I thought about that for a while, and I decided the reason why we take things so seriously is because we want to be taken seriously. And when it comes to beliefs like religion, we want to believe that we matter, and that we have a purpose here, and we are going to fulfill our destiny, and live on in eternity, of course, for some. But we want to matter. We want to believe that we have purpose and we matter in this world. Is there anything wrong with that? Absolutely not. Because everything you see around you is in constant decay. Everything falls apart. Decay is the state of matter. When you look around your house, you start looking at your furniture and the clothes you have, and you see the holes that start to form and things, and they get old and you have to replace them. If you're anything like me, when you see that, you think, wow, everything really falls apart, and human beings are basically just trying to keep things in order. We want to keep our house in order, metaphorically and literally, and we want to believe that we hold some key to understanding the world around us. So, of course. So I started thinking about the issues we fight about and argue about, and when it came to Catholicism versus, say, Freemasonry, the Catholics have always hated the Freemasons. They consider it to be, sacrilegious, if you will. Well, the Freemasons, it was an interesting subject to tackle. Years ago, I talked a lot about this kind of stuff. Freemasonry, the occult, all these different types. And, excuse me, it brought a lot of controversy to my channel. I have a lot of people who were very adamant that it was just satanic, everything that wasn't Christian was satanic, and that knowledge was satanic, and I was satanic. I've had people make videos of me shape-shifting, supposedly, focusing in on my eyes, saying I was a reptilian. I'm not kidding. It was an interesting time. It was kind of fun. But after a while, I opted out of even talking about those things. And so the more I think about this, I wanted to define this point. There are things that we find important and we discuss as far as the things that get people really emotionally riled up. There are things that matter and things that don't matter. So in other words, things in our modern world that affect people, like laws, regulations that prevent us from doing business or living our lives, or keeping people from whatever their rights may be, is different than looking at a historical belief system and saying, well, I'm angry at you because you have a different historical belief system. In other words, when it's not directly affecting you, people will actually argue over not just whether the earth is flat, but calling the other person a complete moron and an idiot for believing what they believe. On all sides, but there's a modern issue where people get upset about things, and then there's a historical. I hope I define that. I know that's really hard for me to kind of explain where I'm coming from. So, whenever there's a controversial subject, it pushes me in deeper, like a tick, man. It's like, oh, you're going to talk about this as something that people shouldn't look at? That makes me want to look at it even more. And the reason I talked a lot about Freemasonry is my grandfather was a 32nd degree Freemason. I thought I would share these with you. I've shown them on the video in the past, and people said that I was, just some sort of a Freemasonic, like, shill working for the government, whatever it might be. But these are the aprons that you get when you are what they call raised as a Freemason. And before you get all butthurt about it, thinking, oh my God, Freemasons are there to rule the world, a little bit of context is in order. As my grandfather was, I didn't know him all that well, but he also had these rings, and I thought I would show these. Now these are Freemason rings, and from different different points in his, Freemason career. I just put them on to kind of show you guys. Now, there's such a dedication, because these rings, it has a little top hat on it that represents, here's one, a gavel for good judgment, and the top hat, I think, for, I don't know, I don't even remember. It doesn't really matter. The point being that I found it interesting to study. And what I found out when I was studying Freemasonry is how much they had to go underground, because the church would basically burn anyone at the stake that was not, that was going against the church's beliefs. And at one time, it was Freemasonry that was pushed underground. And I'm not defending Freemasonry. The point I'm trying to make is that it's just another club. And that one in particular is just a boys' club. Well, so is the Catholic Church. And that's kind of what I come to terms with, that all these clubs seem to favor men. And all of these clubs seem to think that they have some grand answer. And when you look at the Freemasons and what they are today, they're just a shadow of their previous selves. I mean, they, if they ever did hold any real sacred knowledge or, value about the, Solomon or any of these ancient kings or the Knights of Templar, the guys today are just a bunch of dudes sitting around basically hanging out with each other. And they do things around the town, they help out, and they have charities. I'm not dismissing their group. What I'm saying is that for some people, that's a great thing. But it's nothing to be riled up about. And it got me more thinking about how each of these groups thinks that they can box up purpose. Religions have done it for a long time. They want to tell you what your purpose is. The Freemasons tend to believe that they hold some arcane ancient knowledge. At least that's the view a lot of people have of it. And honestly, the way I see Freemasons is, it's just another club, and you take from it what you choose to get from it. And so all the attempts have failed to find this universal truth that we can all believe in. So all these separate little clubs have formed. And meanwhile, people have been arguing among themselves within their groups, talking about how the other side is corrupt and the other side is... and honestly, what it comes down to is self-doubt, dogma, and fear, which causes us to want to believe that our beliefs, that our thoughts and ideas are more valuable than someone else's. And then there's the fear of power, and that's an important factor to cover. The reason why Freemasons are so hated is because they got into a lot of positions of power, and they were at their height, in the early 1900s. Well, a lot of Freemasons have been in office, and a lot of presidents have been Freemasons, and a lot of Freemasons have a lot of money, and a lot of Freemasons have a lot of power. And the minute I thought about that, the connection between when people say, well, Freemasons have power, therefore there must be something evil or an evil intent for this new world order, I thought about Judaism. And I thought about all the hate towards Jews. And yeah, it's a subject I'm going to talk about. I know a lot of people just have this idea that, Jews run the world and they're out to get everyone else. And look, I'm not going to stand up for Israel. And understanding Judaism is a very complicated subject. There's Hasidic Jews. The Jews that live in Israel aren't necessarily all representative of the way the government handles the situation there, and that's not for me to get involved in. I don't live there. The argument between Israel and Palestine, and the fact that we gave them land and basically said, here, we're putting Jews in the middle of Palestinian territory, to me the whole thing is just a clusterfuck, because the Middle East is full of a bunch of religious turmoil, and you can imagine if all these people would just shut their fucking Bibles and look at each other's hearts, this could end. But that's never going to happen. It's not possible, because we're so wrapped up in our doubts, our dogma, our fear, and our beliefs that we are superior to the other side. And many of these supposed secret societies went underground in past centuries, trying to escape religious persecution from the churches, seeing what they were doing. And now, in today's world, with all the information we have available, we have these conspiracy channels that, let's say, sit there and talk shit about all these secret societies and the Illuminati and talk about the Masons. And then you find out these people are very highly religious. They're usually extremely Christian. And therefore, you find out that they are biased already, and they are looking to believe what their church is saying. And so the fear of power, to get back to the Judaism and the power thing, you know, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of Jews in power too. And for the amount of Jews that are in the world, the amount of power and wealth that they have is immense. But let's stop for a minute and ask you a question. What do we as humans really seek? We seek community, kinship with our fellow man, the ability to trust our neighbor, and a belief system consistent so we can all at least get along. And Jews have been able to obtain that. In fact, Jews are the one group who have been able to, even though there's been a lot of conflict around Judaism, within their own group, they help each other, they have done well, they have earned a lot of money. And the same thing happened with the Freemasons. And Manly P. Hall was a Freemason. And a lot of the things I learned from Manly P. Hall weren't because of him being a Freemason, but he became a Freemason because the group saw that within him. He was a very intelligent man who knew a lot of things. And getting wrapped up in the details doesn't matter. The main point is, when you live your life within certain standards and you have certain values and you reflect those values, other people who have those values will see that in you. And if you're a good person who has good work ethic and you're honest and you're fair and you're trustworthy, then people within in that same value system will recognize that and will help you. Okay? This also happens in the religious community. People helping each other because they, I see you're one of us and I will assist you. Within Mormonism, within I don't want to get into the specifics, I guess, because religion seems to take a lot more than it gives, but the church does the exact same thing as these groups. They hold land, they have power, they have massive property holdings and funds. The Vatican is just loaded. So how is the church any different from the Jews? How are the Catholics any different from the Jews and the Freemasons? And does it even really matter? Who owns the world? It's one of those things that when every group that gets too large, it will be abused by some of its senior members. And because of that, everyone who is below them is thrown aside too. So when somebody talks bad about the Catholic Church, it's not that they're talking bad about all Catholics. It's just the 4,392 priests over the last 50 years accused of molesting and abusing young boys and girls. And I hate to bring that up, but the Catholics have really earned their place in history as just another group. And I point that out because when, pardon the pun, but when people think that they're holier than thou, you have to kind of prove that. When 4% of all priests are believed to be abusive, and 7% in Australia and a couple other places. And when Pope Francis, the one that everybody thought was a hero, actually dismissed people's allegations as fabricated when they claimed that they were abused. You know, it took him till 2017 to recognize that the Vatican had at least 2,000 cases on backlog of abuse by priests, where these were just shuffled to another church. The problem isn't that the abuse happened, okay? The problem is that it was shuffled to another church and ignored and buried. How can a group that represents itself as godly do such a thing and hide abuse of children from their own people? I watched a show earlier about this hotline they set up for Mormon families to call if they think that their children were abused by the church members. And of course this hotline, it turns out they traced it, it goes directly to a lawyer's office in some other state. And then the lawyers get to decide how to deal with it and how to prevent the church from getting sued. They're not concerned about the children who are being harmed, or the future of these children, or the suicides from people who are abused. They're just more concerned with protecting the church. And so what does that tell you about the church? And I'm sorry to attack the church, but how can a person still stand up for the Catholic Church after all the shit that's been revealed? So, it's my belief that person-to-person crimes are held to a higher standard than any other crime. So, while people may point their finger at saying you're breaking God's law, I would say, well, you're breaking all of humanity's law by allowing something like this to occur. So, I don't know how many abuses occur in these other groups. You know, I mean, I've heard a lot about what happens in Scientology, which is Scientology to me not a religion but a cult, and a lot of religions are cults, but this specific cult is very unique in its pyramid structure. So they have an entire team of lawyers who basically scour the internet for anybody talking about anything having to do with Scientology. And their job is to either file lawsuits or to pretend like there's somebody who's, you know, supporting the church and to refute any comments against it. So anyway, back to community. Just because some people within a church abuse it doesn't mean that every person has evil intent, of course. And it's a very desirable trait to have community and friendship and kinship. That is what we all seek as humans. And so when somebody offers you that, it's hard to turn it down, especially when it comes in the form of a group of people who seem happy with open arms. The question I guess I would ask is, what does your group ask of its members? Do you have to give 10%, 15%? Do you have to throw money on a collection plate? Why does God seem to always need money? You know, the old George Carlin routine. Always remember that one. But the idea here is to think that certain groups think that they have a monopoly on values, on charity, and it's just not the way it is. The idea is that encouragement, we all have an innate ability to sense when we're doing something right and wrong. I can't define exactly where that comes from. Much of it is probably learned, but I would imagine that there are certain, you know, parts of us that just feel a yearning towards something greater, and therefore we're more likely to fall into a belief system. And when the people who are at the very top of that belief system are failures at the same rate as the rest of the world, you know, as far as the way that they abuse children in the church, like I said, not just the smaller guys, but the top officials, you know, deacons and pastors and bishops. I mean, what does that tell you? It tells you that religion doesn't make people better. And so a person may be likely to think, well, Freemasonry. And I'll tell you, Freemasonry does not make people better either. Nothing makes people better as far as a team or a group. The only thing that makes you better as a person is to learn about other people, all other people. And when you're in a group that dismisses entire groups, that's a very difficult thing to do. I do respect the Freemasons. Since I brought that up, I should say I do respect the fact that they do look at all belief systems, and I understand a lot of, you know, in fact I have a book here that I'm going to share in a minute that will kind of define where I'm coming from there. But this is a stack of books I've got right here that I just kind of wanted to go over, to a whole variety of books that help me, the ideas of the types of subjects that help me understand people. And the first, for example, this one here is Michael Shermer, Why People Believe Weird Things. I have not finished this book yet. In fact, I haven't gotten very far at all. But I've listened to a lot of his speeches. And he's kind of a cocky dude, a little bit arrogant, but I think you have to be if you're a skeptic for a living. And I think he writes for like Skeptic Magazine, if I'm not mistaken. But the guy is, it's called Pseudoscience, Superstition, and Other Confusions of Our Time. Understanding this and understanding, you know, how we can delude ourselves can really help assist us along our way, in my opinion. This book I found in some bookstore or Goodwill somewhere. It's called Enduring Issues in Philosophy, and it's basically a just list of God exists, God doesn't exist. God is the designer of the world, God's not the designer of the world. You know, morals are given, morals are created. All these different, you know, basically positing ideas and going from both sides. This is an off-the-wall one, but Collapse by Jared Diamond. How societies choose to fail or succeed. And that to me helps to understand the mistakes that humans have made in the past and the errors in judgment in thinking that we know what we're talking about. Hallucinations by Oliver Sacks. Phenomenal book. It talks about all different types of hallucinatory disorders, audio, visual, different types of neural disorders that cause us to believe certain things or see certain things. People who have seizures and switch a religion every time they have a seizure because that's how the brain operates. Looking at the little keys of how these things happen helps us to kind of say, and put things together if we're willing to look at them. Here's one I'm reading right now. It's called Nature and Psyche, Radical Environmentalism and the Politics of Subjectivity by David W. Kidner. It's basically where I'm at right here, is it's talking about how people have hijacked the green movement or environmentalism as an excuse to kind of get their frustrations out, and that can be applied to so many different facets of society. What you would say is this is kind of a look into the mind of a social justice warrior, if you will, or an environmentalist who's extreme, at the beginning anyway. I don't know where it's going to go, but very interesting book. But then we get down to these books, these ancient books, which people might think are like, whoa, drop that. All right, The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. As I mentioned him earlier, this is a big-ass book, and a lot of it's hogwash, a lot of it's phenomenal. I mean, it goes on to, it's got pictures of, Osiris and different ancient writings, paintings, stories about, symbolism and how it applies. This kind of stuff has actually brought me a lot more understanding than anything else I've read, but it has limited application. So, that's my opinion. I just wanted to say I also have the Holy Bible, because a lot of people say, that's the greatest book ever. I don't know. I have a hard time reading the Bible. I've read plenty of... Oh, look at that. On page 496. Oh, it fell apart. It was an old pot leaf from one of my gardens back in the day. That must have been really old. God loves cannabis. Oh, that's funny. When I first started growing pot, like years and years, decades ago, I've had that Bible for a really long time. And so I also have this, the earliest gospel. And this is fascinating because by reading this, I didn't know that the Gospel of Mark was such a controversy, that the church was so upset about it because it didn't mention Jesus as some great savior, but just the Son of Mary. And this is fascinating. It's actually on really light paper. It says... this was made during 1943. Wartime books. Wartime shortage of pulp, manpower, and transportation has produced a severe shortage of paper. In compliance with the orders of the War Productions Board, wartime books are printed on lighter weight paper. And it goes on to explain why. And this book is written by a guy. It says, to Jean, many daughters have done worthily, but thou excellent them all. And it talks about the Gospel of Mark and explains the controversies between why certain books were omitted from the Bible and why certain words were changed by the Council of Nicaea. And basically, you think a book like this is, it's just a counterpart to the Bible, but really it refutes a lot of what we want to believe. Why they eliminated the Council of Nicaea eliminated the Book of Enoch and changed some of the wording around, and how the translation from Hebrew got way, way, way corrupted. And just like what happened with Freemasonry, just how it got corrupted. What is the point to all this? That we should be teaching values and understanding and respect and curiosity, not facts and figures and dogmas. And if we directly oppose every other belief system by our belief system, by mere existence of it, then I think we're missing the whole point. I don't know whether we can separate from that. People want to have a team. They want to feel like they're on a team. And it's difficult to walk away from that. Like I said, I had this book I bought at Goodwill a couple years ago, The Lexicon of Freemasonry. It's a big-ass book. It's like, 500 pages? And it's just basically descriptions and terms about what Freemasonry means and what the different terms in it are, what grandmasters are, the square, level, plumb, a bunch of understandings about Hebrew, Jerusalem, and so to kind of come to a closing here, I respect Freemasonry probably more than I respect any religion, because Freemasonry teaches that the only belief you need is a belief in a higher power. And when I was 18, 20, I would not admit that there was a God, because God was so polluted and corrupted by people's aversions of it. And I say it could not possibly be a him. So anyone who defines God as a he is merely applying, their their sexuality to a being, a benign being who created the universe. So if anything, if there is a God that created the universe, this benign being is surely asexual and surely knows how to create a universe without a wife, right? Unless God has a wife. And so that would be a thing for somebody to answer. The final book I should mention here is the Necronomicon. Now, I'm curious to know, what is your first thought when you hear that? If there's a Christian out there who actually made it to the end of this, what are your thoughts on this term? That there was an actual satanic Bible that was written, but the Necronomicon itself is a collection of stories by H.P. Lovecraft, and this is where the Call of Cthulhu comes from. In fact, I'd love to read this aloud sometime, some of these, because they're phenomenal. Oh, I even have a $5 billion bookmark from the Bank of Zimbabwe before they completely collapsed, like the U.S. will. So anyhow, this was based on a completely fabricated town, which they have a whole map about in the back. And many of these stories kind of tell the darker side of us. So I just wanted to finalize with that by saying that if you cannot embrace your dark side, and I'm not talking about, I think this is misunderstood a lot. Dark side doesn't mean that you are embracing your hatred or evil or corruption. It means that you're embracing what comes your way, your thoughts, your positive and negative thoughts, and realizing that as humans, all we can do is just let these thoughts pass through our mind, try to understand them, try to understand each other. And I believe that the more we avoid solid belief systems and dogma, the better off we are. That this is only what I've observed in my 43 years on this planet, is that everyone around me who seems to be really strong into what they believe has to defend that so often that they seem fucking miserable. Pardon the language, but they really do. The more extreme a person is, it seems like the more that they're hiding from themselves, that they're forgetting that they're here for a short time, regardless of what happens afterwards. That we have to really just let things go and stop trying to defend our points of view all the time. We should just be able to laugh it off. Put it this way, if somebody totally says, I don't believe anything you believe and I think that you're completely full of shit, you should be able to say, cool, I'm cool with that. I don't care. Because if we do, that means we're not sure. And that's the way I see it anyhow. So, like I said, there are different things that we get upset about. When we're arguing over religion, when we're arguing over conspiracies, these things don't go anywhere. But there are still things worth getting upset about, things that affect us in the modern world. And if we put more time into actually solving the economic problems that we have and trying to improve the future, rather than trying to prove that we're right about our belief in some ancient God, then I don't know, maybe we might get something done. Maybe not. Thanks for watching. Talk to you all later, and have a wonderful day.
But everybody, you see, who is at all sensitive and awake to their own problems and human problems is trying to change himself. We know we can't change the world unless we change ourselves. If we are all individually selfish, we're going to be collectively selfish. If we don't really love people and only pretend to, somehow we've got to find a way to love. After all, it's said in the Bible, thou shalt love the Lord thy God and your neighbor as yourself. You must love. Yeah, we all agree. Sure. But we don't.